Good evening. Facing South tonight looks at a disease that's been called the greatest public health risk of the century. Here in the south and southeast, AIDS is already a major threat. This month alone, there's been 2 deaths in the region. So far, it's the homosexual community that's been in the front line. But how many others are at risk from this deadly virus? And can anything be done to stop it? Joining us from our London studio tonight will be the man best qualified to talk about the scale of the problem, the government's Chief Medical Officer, Donald Atchison. But first, Steve MacDonald reports on how AIDS has spread through the south of England. He's found evidence of growing panic among the public that's blighting many hundreds of lives and could end up by putting all of us in danger. And he's spoken not only to the victims, but also to the friends and families of those who are left behind.
As a child, he was hyperactive in the days when that really wasn't a term that was generally used. At 8, really in order to copy his older sister, he picked up Beethoven's Fiorelisa and played it off. And from then on, we didn't really have any further trouble with the hyperactivity because he put all his energies into the piano.
Judith Christie, remembering her only son, Kevin, who caught AIDS and died 12 weeks ago at Crawley Hospital in Sussex. His body was wrapped in plastic and cremated.
He was also interested in drama. He had friends who made a film of him dressed as Charlie Chaplin. I've never seen the film, so I don't really know how good it is, but everyone who's seen it speaks very highly of it. I think we've discovered his great talent was really for making friends, and he had lots and lots of friends.
I just can't say enough in praise of him. He pulled himself together and really sort of, I don't know, he suddenly seemed, his outlook on life got much broader all of a sudden, and he really rose to it and met it fully. One didn't feel that it overwhelmed him at all.
Kevin was a practicing homosexual. It's thought he caught the AIDS virus while visiting America. In the States, AIDS cases are increasing almost every day. The numbers of people with the virus that could lead to full-blown AIDS are also reaching horrendous proportions. And we in Britain, it's feared, could be only a few years behind.
In the United States, the number of cases of people infected has increased from virtually 0 in about 1977 or 78 to something of the order of 500,000 or 1 million by the end of 1985. Now, whether it'll reach that level in England isn't clear, but I mean, it seems likely that within 5 or 10 years, we shall certainly have hundreds of thousands of people infected.
Not all AIDS experts take such a pessimistic line, but the prospect of AIDS levels in Britain reaching American proportions is now too real to ignore. It's a threat to all of us, and it hangs like a cloud over every gay community in the country. Britain's biggest gay community outside London is here in Brighton, with an estimated 15,000 male homosexuals. That's a ratio of 1 in 10 of the population, giving Brighton one of the greatest concentrations of gays in the UK and on the continent. With more relaxed public attitudes since the late 1960s, the homosexual community had been flourishing. But that was before AIDS. Already 5 men in Brighton have developed the disease, and today 4 of them are dead. One of Brighton's gay pubs, for the regulars, an oasis of friendliness in an often hostile environment. To the public, it seems AIDS is a gay disease, and since it appeared, public attitudes to gays have changed dramatically.
Gay people were starting to be more open, tell people they are gay, not to be so ashamed of it. But because of AIDS, they're going back into themselves, they're frightened to admit that they're gay because people just associate with them with AIDS.
AIDS is short for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. It means a breakdown in the body's immune system, its natural ability to fight off diseases. Because of this breakdown, people with AIDS succumb to infections which people in good health are unlikely to catch. So far, it's incurable and deadly. Most AIDS victims die within 3 years. Bill Ayres discovered he had AIDS just over a year ago when he was living in Brighton. Each day, he lived with the knowledge that his time was running out.
It's not to do with AIDS, it's to do with the fact that I'm terminal. It's to do with the fact that I've been told that I've probably got not that long, and obviously there are things that I might vaguely regret, and there are things that I would like to do in the future which I won't be able to achieve. So of course I get depressed as much as anybody else would who was told that they didn't have very much longer to go.
Bill Ayres died last week, the 140th AIDS death in Britain. He'd been struck down by a new and unusual virus. But although its effects can be devastating, in fact it's not very contagious. There's no evidence that people with AIDS can pass it on through casual social contact. The virus is carried in blood and semen. It's transmitted only by intimate sexual contact, or if it's passed directly into the bloodstream. In Britain, 9 in 10 people who've developed full-blown AIDS have been homosexual or bisexual men. In the West, they form the biggest risk group. But 2 other groups are also at high risk. Drug abusers who share injection needles, haemophiliacs who've received contaminated blood. A blood test can establish whether someone has come into contact with the virus. In Brighton, it's available at the Hospital Clinic for Genito-Urinary Medicine. Here, more than 1,000 gays have come for the test. It works on the simple principle that the body, if attacked by a virus, will create antibodies.
Antibodies are the immune response to an infection with HTLV-3 virus. So it will only indicate that he has been in contact with the virus and that his immune system is reacting to it and developing antibodies. And they are the ones we actually identify and say whether they are, if they are there, we say they are positive. If they are not identified, we say it's negative.
In Brighton so far, 100 people tested at the clinic have been antibody positive, and all but 2 of them are homosexual or bisexual men. The number of antibody-positive people who go on to develop AIDS could be as low as 1 in 10. But the other 9, although showing no symptoms, seem to be able to pass the virus on to others. They become carriers, and this pool of carriers can build up with alarming speed. In San Francisco, back in 1977, only 1% of gay men carried traces of the virus. Today, that figure has topped 80%. And the rise in those who are antibody positive has been followed in the United States by a sharp rise in those suffering from full-blown AIDS. Cases have risen from 0 in 1979 to 16,000 at the start of 1986. The fear is that unless we can learn from the American experience, the same pattern will be repeated here in Britain.
The rate of increase in England is more or less what it was in America 3 or 4 years earlier, and in America there are now 16,000 cases. So we know that within 3 or 4 years, there are certainly likely to be 10,000 or more cases if these trends continue, and we've no reason to think that they won't.
Scientists have been working urgently to find a vaccine, but so far there's been no breakthrough. For the time being, the only hope of controlling AIDS is to contain the virus within the risk groups and stop it spreading any further. The remedy for drug abusers is a simple message: don't share needles. A publicity campaign is underway, and so far only 2 intravenous drug users in Britain are known to have contracted AIDS. The outlook for haemophiliacs has improved. They'd been at risk from contaminated blood transfusions of the clotting agent Factor VIII, which is made up from thousands of pooled donations. Now all Factor VIII is being heat-treated to kill the virus, and all donated blood is screened for the presence of AIDS antibodies. Could accept the need for fewer partners, some experts believe the spread of the virus could be stopped. Dr. Chamaroff in Brighton advises gay people that promiscuity is dangerous.
First of all, we find out what are his present relationships. I mean, is he, for example, monogamous? Or is he, has he got other partners? Or indeed, is he promiscuous? And we work on that. We start very simply saying that he has simply got to curtail his sexual activities. He is infective and he is responsible to others. He must try to stick to one partner or as few partners as possible.
Dr. Chamaroff believes that in Brighton, the message has already got home, assisted by the special character of the town's gay population.
Brighton has probably one of the largest gay populations in Europe, certainly even more than larger than London. we have a lot of homosexuals here in Brighton. But the difference between our gay population and, say, the London population, and definitely the San Francisco or New York population, is that they are roughly about one generation older than their London friends. They tend to be more monogamous originally, i.e. they tend to be couples who have sort of come to settle down in Brighton, either to sort of open a restaurant or open an hotel or whatever, open a business in Brighton.
But will the staid lifestyle of Brighton's older gays be enough to put a brake on AIDS? The town has a special problem, its reputation as a gay resort. Discos like this may be fairly quiet during the week, but at weekends they attract hundreds of homosexuals from London, where at some clinics 3 in 10 gay men have been found to carry the virus. So unless every gay in Brighton is monogamous, the danger persists. Many within the homosexual community believe a better way to stop AIDS spreading is to convert younger gays to what they call safer sex.
Good evening, Terence Higgins Trust.
This is the message from the Terence Higgins Trust, an AIDS charity in London, where volunteers manning the telephone helpline take more than 1,000 calls a month.
So once you understand the ideas around safer sex, then it doesn't mean that it's no sex. What it means is that it's careful sex, and it's a positive commitment to health, both your health and your partner's health, all right?
The Trust workers advise gay callers that anal sex carries the highest risk, and the more men they have sex with, the greater the chance of getting AIDS.
So, the first thing to do is to not ejaculate inside your partner. All right, now, if you are going to go in for anal intercourse, then you're going to have to use a condom.
The Terence Higgins Trust in London is manned mainly by gay volunteers. In the south, advice on AIDS is also offered by a network of gay switchboards, and by AIDS helplines, which are springing up across the region. One of the busiest of these is Brighton's.
We've got a number of different strands that we actually work in. So as well as the helpline services, we run what is known as a buddying service, which means that we visit people with AIDS and help people with AIDS with the problems that they have. We also run a group of people who are antibody positive to help them as well. We see a large part of our work as being in the health education area, so that we're doing a lot of work about educating people about safer sex.
That would be a good idea. Hello, we're from the Sussex AIDS Helpline. Would you like to take one of these?
Tonight, the helpline campaigners are visiting the gay pubs, dispensing pamphlets about safer sex. In the envelope, there's also a safety pin, a symbol of safer sex, to be worn like a badge.
But do you think people are seeing too much of this now?
No, I think it has to be emphasised because it's a killer disease.
Yeah. So you think this sort of thing we should keep on doing and in different ways?
Yes, seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, people are walking into places nowadays and seeing this sort of thing, or leaflets, brochures, whatever, about AIDS, and they're becoming a little bit tired and bored with it. You know,
do you think we're actually doing too much now?
On the homosexual scene, yes.
Yeah. Do you think that people are actually changing their sexual behaviour?
A small percentage, yes. Yeah, but I don't think it's going to change that much until you make everybody aware.
The question remains, is such a radical change in sexual behaviour too much to ask of the gay community?
Yes, I mean, for instance, if you take one of the main issues to do with anal intercourse, I mean, it is equivalent to asking heterosexuals to give up ordinary intercourse, which I think is not only asking too much, it's unfeasible.
The helpline workers disagree, but if the campaigns for fewer partners and safer sex are unfeasible, then how can the spread of AIDS be stopped? Some experts believe the only workable answer is widespread blood testing to establish who is antibody positive.
No, it's easy for people who are infected to take care, but it's very difficult for people who aren't infected to take care because they don't know who to be careful of. And unless the entire Western world is going to give up sex, which seems rather unlikely, it seems to me essential that people who are positive are in some sense identifiable.
The Americans are hoping cards like this might provide an answer. They call it a social card. This one shows the bearer has been tested for AIDS and herpes and on both counts he's negative. That means, in plain terms, he's a safe bet for a bedfellow, but he'd expect whoever he shows it to produce a similarly clean bill of health. The idea appeals to some AIDS experts over here, who see widespread testing as the only way to trace and possibly contain the disease.
To control the epidemic, the whole population should be tested once every 6 months, and that would actually be logistically feasible, but it simply isn't socially acceptable. And so that's why I think it's particularly important that the gay community should address this problem itself and launch its own campaign for private testing.
But among the helpline volunteers, we found no one prepared to support the card scheme. Many found it deeply offensive.
There is no medical reason, as long as people stick to safer sex guidelines, why an antibody-positive person should not have a sexual relationship with somebody who is antibody negative. This card would bring back, it's a cliche in a way, it would bring back the days of the 30s, it would bring back the days of the pink triangles, it would bring back all sorts of fascist implications.
The quarrel over testing may never be resolved, but for individuals there can be strong reasons to take the antibody test. Paul Davis in Brighton, for instance, has been worried for some time that he's caught the AIDS virus. A negative result for him would mean a huge burden lifted.
Being in a high-risk group as a gay man and feeling that in the past year or so I have put myself at risk, I feel that I ought to have the test just to reassure myself. And I feel that personally I would be able to handle the result if it's positive. Though I'm aware that some people can't do that, but I've read the arguments for and against. I've read a lot of the facts on the subject.
Sue Bell in Southampton is another gay person who believes testing is important. Not just for herself, but because the AIDS virus can be passed from mother to child in the womb, for the next generation as well. As a lesbian who wanted a child, she advertised for a gay to be the father.
Well, it was because I'm a lesbian myself. If I'd met a man who was heterosexual, he could have tried to claim custody of the child on the ground that I was gay. And if I had a gay man to be the father, I would see us as on more equal terms there. It really is quite a threat because I've known women in the past who have lost their children for this reason.
Sue is now planning a brother or sister for Raymond, and she's already made contact with a gay man in Bournemouth. She wants him to father the child, but only on certain strict conditions. He must have his blood tested twice to establish he's antibody negative. And furthermore, he must remain celibate until they're sure he doesn't carry the virus.
When I sort of add it all up, it's asking a lot of one particular man.
Why do you think he would want to go through with all this?
Because he would be very interested in having a child of his own. There are quite a few gay men who have never been married but are very interested in having a child. But normally they wouldn't expect to have that opportunity.
So, on the face of it, regular blood tests for gay men have clear advantages. And for Paul today, the worry is over. His test proved negative. But what if he'd been antibody positive? This man had a positive result. It's part of Dr. Chamaroff's job now to tell him gently what that means.
Does it mean I'm going to get AIDS?
Certainly it does not mean that. It certainly doesn't mean that. Now, it only means that you have been in contact with HTLV3 virus, and now you have developed antibodies against that virus.
The doctor is reassuring, but the public will be less compassionate. AIDS hysteria, fueled by the popular press, has spread almost as fast as the disease itself. Any gay who decides to take the test is liable to come up against a tide of prejudice. People dying with AIDS were the first to discover this.
Do you know about...
David Caffery visits AIDS patients as part of his work with the Sussex AIDS Helpline. A few months ago, he was called out to a new patient and found, to his horror, that the man in front of him was a close friend.
I actually sort of spoke to his mother and gave his mother a lot of support, I hope. And I was appalled at the stories which his mother told me about people who were actually refusing to go in and look after him.
Which sort of people? Medical authorities? Neighbours?
Mainly medical people. Neighbours that he was being seen by his local priest and his family doctor, who wasn't his doctor, which was in fact his mother's doctor, was going in to see him, and the priest and me, and that was all. He was getting no other help whatsoever from any of the services that one would normally expect if one was terminally ill.
My mother, when she was nursing me, when I came out of hospital, had no help from the social services in any sense. They didn't know what she should wash and what she should touch and what she shouldn't. She had to pray and hope that the information I gave her, and at times I was very ill, was correct. All the way through, everybody who comes into contact with you are, A, they're fearful, and I don't blame them, the information they receive, and B, when they try to find out information, the answers are evasive.
Kevin Christie was another AIDS patient, befriended by the helpline volunteers in his final days, but not by the authorities.
We took him first to the local GP, whom I can't praise enough. He swallowed very hard when we said AIDS, but immediately became interested in it. He examined the skin cancer. He touched it, which, you know, must have taken a little bit of thought. We nursed him at home for as long as we could. We couldn't find a nurse that we could hire. We couldn't even get a commode from the Red Cross. That, I think, was the bitterest blow that I had. Somehow one believes so extremely in the British Red Cross. I could hardly accept it, that we couldn't have a commode. It was 16 yards from his bed to the loo. He couldn't walk very well. We had to support him, and it was fairly desperate.
The revulsion felt by many people towards AIDS patients is hard for relatives to bear. But such is the fear of the disease today, there's now a growing hysteria about people not with AIDS, but just the virus antibodies. People like Martin Weaver. He came out and admitted he was gay while a student at Portsmouth Polytechnic. A year ago, he took the antibody test and found he was positive.
It's very much like admitting you're gay. It's coming out all over again with all those kind of problems that entails, because people don't know anything about it. Well, the immediate thing is antibody positive. People say, what's that? Because a lot of people don't know what it means. And then you say, well, it means I've been in contact with the AIDS virus. And people never listen past the word AIDS. So they immediately think, this person has AIDS, shock horror, I'm going to catch it. And some people have run off a mile.
On the face of it, Martin is no different from anyone else. He shows no sign of developing the disease and has a normal life expectancy. There's no evidence at all that he could pass the virus on through casual social contact. But people like him who admit they're antibody positive can expect all sorts of trouble. Some dentists have refused treatment. Life assurance companies have refused cover. Mortgages can be refused. Sometimes even jobs can be lost.
Well, myself, so far, I work in a good place, a supportive place. There's no real problem at the moment. But I do know friends who've been sacked from their jobs. A couple of nurses in private hospitals have been asked to resign simply because they're antibody positive. People have actually walked away from me before now, and I've told them I'm antibody positive. So people are scared, they don't know what to do.
We've had this
AIDS helplines have many such examples of public bigotry towards people who are antibody positive. And this is now emerging as a major obstacle to any program of mass testing for gay men. Largely because of the widespread hostility, the Sussex helpline, for one, has decided not to recommend testing for people who don't know whether they carry the virus.
A positive result for people who are otherwise well and who are going to remain well causes such distress and such anxiety, as well as in some cases personal discrimination either in employment or housing or just amongst their own friends, that we're no longer sure that having the result, having a positive result, is at all useful for the vast majority of people. If you're ill, it's a different matter, but if you're well, we aren't really in favour of it these days.
The helpline policy not to recommend testing is now backed by some doctors who've seen how prejudice can ruin the lives of antibody-positive people. Their attitude annoys AIDS academics, like Professor Peter.
I think it's a profound mistake that the problems of the patients are appalling, but the problems of the future patients are more serious, because there are more of them. And in a sense, it isn't appropriate that a doctor's concern with the patient in front of him should outweigh his concern with the person or people that patient's going to infect.
Bigotry from the public is making Professor Pito's forecast more likely, especially since recent research points to another danger that's a direct result of prejudice. Professor Coxon is a social scientist who's also an official on FRIEND, the National Counselling Service for Homosexuals. In a major research study just completed and unpublicized until tonight, he suggests that public hostility to the gay community will drive more homosexuals underground.
People are finding ways in which they're not going to be identified as gay, of which marriage is perhaps one of the best screens and always has been. So it's very likely that more predominantly gay men are going to be going into marriage as a screen, in effect, for their own identity. That's one consequence that's clearly evident.
So prejudice from heterosexuals could end up by putting the heterosexuals themselves at risk?
Yes, it's very ironic, because it produces the very thing it's supposed to prevent.
The Coxon report warns that driving gays underground will have devastating consequences. It says anonymous high-risk sex will increase and the AIDS virus will spread more rapidly. Equally disturbing, if more predominantly homosexual men go into marriage as a screen, AIDS will spread faster to the heterosexual community. Professor Coxon's view is shared by others working in this field. Sue Bell is also a counsellor to homosexuals on FRIEND, and many of the gays she's met are already leading double lives.
You've got to bear in mind that a lot of gay men, and not necessarily ones who are on the gay scene, are married men, particularly the sort of men who are scared of being known to be gay. The vast majority of the men who are caught, for instance, in public toilets each year are married men. They've got wives and families at home. I can see that as a very easy way for the ordinary heterosexual population to pick up the virus, and the wives probably not even realising it.
So far in the West, the incidence of AIDS among women is low, but the fog of ignorance and prejudice puts everyone in danger. There's general agreement that what's needed is a massive public information campaign. Last month, the government announced a £7 million AIDS package, and this will include a health education publicity drive starting in a few weeks' time. The question is, will that campaign include the explicit advice that's needed about safer sex? The DHSS are anxious not to shy away from it, but the record of other branches of officialdom has not been good. This booklet on AIDS was written for gays by a group of doctors. In it, they explain the nature of the disease and how it spreads. But today, it's unobtainable. The police raided the printers where it was produced and seized the plates. They've consistently refused to return them. Many see that incident as a bad omen for Britain. We've seen what's happened in America. Is there time for the authorities to act more positively and stop it happening here?
If there were 20,000 people infected in England, and the majority of them are homosexual, it's an appalling problem for the gay community, but not yet a very serious problem for the general community. If we let it spread to the level it's reached in America, it'll be an appalling problem forever.
For Kevin Christie, it's too late anyway. But his family won't easily forget those last few months, and they believe AIDS won't be beaten until prejudice and fear are overcome.
Well, I always find it easy to find excuses for people who are frightened. I really feel that the biggest disease of our age is not AIDS or anything else. It's fear that is the disease.
The thoughts of a mother whose son became an AIDS victim and died just a few weeks ago. We're going to take a break now. In part 2, I'll be asking the government's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Donald Atchison, what can be done to stop AIDS claiming even more young lives. Join us then. Welcome back. In part 1 of the programme, we examined the spread of the killer disease AIDS here in the south and southeast and heard some fairly harrowing stories. So what can be done to prevent the AIDS virus spreading in the horrifying way it has done in the USA? Joining me in our London studio is the man charged with tackling this problem, the government's Chief Medical Officer, Donald Atchison. Dr. Atchison, a very good evening to you. Could we first of all look ahead to the future and ask you what sort of threat you think this poses here in the UK?
Yes, AIDS and the virus which underlies it is a serious threat. We had our first cases in this country in 1982, and by the end of last year we'd had 275 cases. But the thing which is more important is not that rather small number of cases of the illness, but the fact that we believe that perhaps as many as 20,000 people are infected with the virus.
Would you go along with Professor Pito, who we heard in our film, say that in his view, in the not too distant future, this could affect hundreds of thousands of people?
No, I think that's purely speculative. What we can say with some certainty is that in 1988, we may have as many as 2,000 cases of AIDS. But the number of people who are infected by that time will depend entirely on the efforts of all of us to control the spread of the infection.
But at the moment, Dr. Etchison, despite your very best efforts, we have neither a vaccine nor a cure. So isn't it possible that Professor Pito's analysis will in time prove to be correct?
Of course it's possible, but I think it's unlikely, because even if we don't have a vaccine or treatment, as rational human beings, we have it in our power to reduce the rate of spread of the infection by changing our habits.
Well, you are asking, and many doctors are asking, members of the gay community to do that, to involve themselves in what's become known as safer sex, to try to restrict themselves to one partner. Although that would seem to many people a perfectly reasonable thing to ask, is it really a practical thing to ask? Is it realistic, do you think, given the habits of these people?
I think it is realistic, and there's evidence that in other parts of the world it has actually happened. And also, in fact, there's evidence in England that it has happened. People have reduced the number of partners, and many of them have taken up safer habits of sex.
But do you think they'll be able to do that in sufficient numbers to actually control it to what we might describe, perhaps regrettably, as acceptable levels?
Well, all I can tell you is that I hope so, because it is the only method we have, education, to change habits available to control the spread of the infection at present.
What's your response to those doctors who we heard about in the film, who are now saying that in their view, people who involve themselves in what's described as safe sex and feel perfectly healthy shouldn't in fact go for testing because of the problems that itself causes, the prejudice people face if they get a positive result?
I don't think people face prejudice because they have a positive result. They face prejudice if people know they have a positive result, sometimes, unfortunately. So the key there is that the result of the test must be confidential, and so it should be.
But it isn't, is it? It leaks out. We all know that, Dr. Atchison, and there is this incredible prejudice in the society. I mean, how are we going to tackle that? Can we ever reverse that?
I think it leaks out usually because the person himself or herself tells other people. I don't know of any case where it's leaked out because a doctor has told a third party.
Do you think we can reverse that prejudice now, or is it too late?
Prejudice is something which we're all responsible for. Governments and medical professions cannot control prejudice. We have to take into account the attitude of the media, both on television and in the press, in this very important matter.
One final point, Dr. Atchison. I take on board very much what you say. It seems to us from our researches that the gay community, certainly in the South and Southeast, has reacted quickly, efficiently, and with a great degree of responsibility to this problem. Do you honestly think the government can say the same? Do you think that the £7 million package announced last month might perhaps be seen by some, anyway, to be too little too late?
Well, I think there'll always be people who say that anything that is done is too little or too late, but a great deal has been done, and more is going to be done shortly. As I think you know, in November, the ministers announced the planning of a campaign of public education on a national scale, which will be directed not only to the general population, but also to the groups which are particularly at risk. And we're in an advanced stage of planning that particular program.
Let's hope it does some good, Dr. Atchison. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, that's it for this week. Join us at the same time next Friday for another edition of Facing South. Until then, good night and enjoy your weekend.